Hi. Well, welcome back to my living room. My name is Erin. I'm a therapist, and today we're going to be tier ranking TV therapists. This is obviously a huge trend among YouTube, and I was like, I think I need to hop on board and rank some TV therapists from best to most likely to ruin your life. So that's what we're going to be doing today, looking at a multitude of therapists and analyzing if they would actually be helpful or if they're actually going to leave you worse than you came in. These are my cats. I always introduce them at the beginning of every video because they usually find their way onto my lap partway through the video. So this is Sorrel, and you probably can't see her, but she's sitting in her little basket. Her name is Sage. Sorrel feels like it's time for her to join the video. So here we go. I think Sorrel wants to say hi to all my new subs. Thank you so much for those of you who have decided to subscribe and join along. Thank you so much for all of the helpful comments and views on my severance video. It did really well, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm really appreciative that people really took to it because that was one that I felt really excited about. So I hope this one feels the same way. I'm excited about doing this one too because it was kind of fun to just analyze. Like, obviously it's kind of like when doctors watch medical shows and they're like, ugh, that is not what would happen. Same thing here. Sometimes when I watch these therapists, I'm like, oh my God, that is egregious. That is literally horrible. So I'm excited to talk about them. Let's just get into it. Okay, so my tier ranking system I've created there's 5 categories. At the top, we have 10 out of 10 would bare my soul. This is the creme de la creme, like best therapist. I would feel comfortable going to them, and I know that they could probably do some effective work with me. Number 2 down from that is helpful but flawed. So not quite maybe into that top tier, but not so unethical that that I wouldn't consider seeing them. 3 is meh. It's better than nothing. Like, not great, not terrible, better than probably talking to a wall. So number 4, and tier 4, I should say, is questionable ethics ahead, which really just means they're not quite dipping into the ruin your life status, but they're also not quite ethical, healthy therapists either. And last but not least, we have this therapist will ruin your life. Do not see them. You will come out of therapy worse than you entered. It's possible. There are bad therapists out there. So let's get ranking. All right, let's do Dr. Phil first.
Catch me outside, how about that?
He somehow is still on TV after all these years. I'm astounded that he still is. He does have the correct credentialing. He does have his doctorate in psychology, and he let his credentials, or I guess his licensure, fully lapse in 2006. So he can't actually formally practice therapy anymore. I'm putting him in the middle of meh. It's better than nothing because he gives very generalized advice. I feel like he probably has helped some people on his show, but he's also not, the most in tune therapist that I would probably go to see. He's qualified. He knows what he's talking about, but also meh. He also told a family on air that they were raising a serial killer, and he called the kid a potential serial killer, which I'm like, oh my God, that's so damaging to a kid's psyche on national television. So for that reason, I also put him in the middle because I was like, that's pretty bad.
Your son has 9 of the 14. Jeffrey Dahmer had 7.
But also, he's not practicing full therapy, so can I really hold it against him? So he lands right in the middle because I believe he's probably better than talking to a wall, but also not great. All right, let's do Betty Draper's therapist next. So Betty Draper's therapist, his name is Arnold Wayne. He's actually a psychiatrist, which is something that I need to talk about really quickly. So a lot of people get confused with the definitions of therapist versus psychologist versus psychiatrist. Psychiatry is you have your medical license. So you've gone through med school and you have all the knowledge for helping mental health disorders through medication. You have little to no training in talk therapy and building like therapeutic rapport with an individual and working them through trauma. That's not their background. So it's really funny to me because the majority of TV shows are like, let's go see a psychiatrist. But it's like every psychiatrist they portray is doing what a psychologist or a therapist would do. A psychologist has their doctorate in psychology, so they're more advanced therapists. Often they specialize in something very specific so that they can work in that field for the rest of their lives. And then therapists are credentialed, they have their masters, they have to get their license in order to practice fully, and they are highly trained in talk therapy and building therapeutic relationships and helping people through mental health disorders. So it's really funny. I'm always like, okay, that person's not really doing the job of psychiatrist. I mean, psychiatrists can talk to you about your mental health stuff, but they're not qualified to guide you through it in the way that a psychologist or a therapist would. In the same way that a therapist is not qualified to be talking about medication or prescribing medication in any way, shape, or form. So he's actually considered a psychiatrist in the show, and I am ranking him in will ruin your life. He literally calls Betty's husband, Don, after their sessions and discloses everything she just told him. Usually it's about Don. So Don would use this knowledge in his day-to-day life to his advantage, unbeknownst to Betty. Not to mention that this breaks so many confidentiality laws. That's like therapy 101. It's like you can't tell people who you're seeing or what they say. Point blank. So it breaks all those laws. It was also the 50s, so I don't really know how many of those laws really existed yet. I'm not sure. Probably not a lot. But then also this was just a complete form of misogyny and manipulation. So safe to say this guy would ruin your life if you're a woman who's married and is especially worried about her husband's infidelity. He sucks. Okay, let's do Frasier next. I love Frasier. It's a great sitcom. I think it's well loved for good reason. And it's just a really clever concept for a show. But where I put Frasier might upset some people. That's okay. I put him in meh. It's better than nothing. I struggled where to land him because I think the show is phenomenal, and I didn't want that to bias my input of, do I actually think he's a good therapist? So like I mentioned earlier, he's actually not a therapist. He's a psychiatrist. So again, does not have that same formal training, but throughout the show, he deeply cares about informing himself. He reads a lot of journal articles. He's always doing studies. So he cares about being informed enough to help people. I think the problem is in his talk show, he gives very generalized advice and he diagnoses very quickly. Within 2 minutes, usually, of talking to somebody on the phone, which is not correct. That's not ethical. You usually have to wait a little bit before you can have a formal diagnosis for somebody because you want to make sure you have all the contextual information and you want to see them over multiple sessions to make sure that you have an accurate diagnosis. And a lot of times you don't even share your diagnosis with the client. There's a whole code of ethics, again, that goes along with, do you share your diagnosis with somebody? And so he just automatically does that, whether or not people want to hear the diagnosis. He's great in the sense that he's compassionate and he's funny and he's relatable. And I think he brings a lot of authenticity when he's talking on his radio show or talking to his clients. But again, I wouldn't bare my soul to him because he's not formally trained. He's not a full therapist. If I needed psychiatric advice, maybe I would go to him if I needed medication or something. But again, he's not doing anything wrong, but he's also not fully trained like he should be. And I think he's jumping to conclusions a bit. So he lands in meh. It's better than nothing. I didn't even mention what I'm drinking today. Could take a quick coffee break in the midst of this. I'm just drinking cold brew out of a coffee mug. Really fancy. But the coffee mug my friend gave me for my birthday, she found it at a thrift store. It has a big E on it for Erin. She just thought of me. I love it. I feel so seen. Okay, who should we do next? Let's do Jimmy from Shrinking. So if you haven't seen Shrinking, new show, Apple TV, it's all about therapists. So of course I've seen it. I love it. I think it's a great show. It's got some very pointed jokes towards therapists that I find hilarious because they're all accurate.
But I'm starting to lose hope.
Well, it's understandable.
You've been trying this approach for almost 10 minutes.
But I put Jimmy in Ruin Your Life. The entire show is about Jimmy breaking ethical boundaries and guidelines in order to better help his clients. So already that's the basis of the show. I think Jimmy's well-intentioned. He has a great heart. He really, really cares about his clients and seeing their betterment. But if at any point in time you feel like your therapist is telling you to off your spouse, probably means that they've ruined your life. Jimmy is a complete mess. And there are so many things that I could point out that show what ethical boundaries and guidelines he's crossed. But that's also the entire point of the show. I'm honestly just shocked that Jimmy did not lose his licensure after his client threw her abusive husband off a cliff because she felt like he was telling her to. So yeah, I think seeing Jimmy just might ruin your life. Love the guy, love the show, would never see him. Next, let's look at Dr. Akopian. She is from the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which I have never watched, in part because I had never heard of it, and also in part because it's a comedy musical, and I hate musicals with every fiber of my being, so I will never watch the show. But I had to watch some of it, obviously, to analyze whether or not she was a good therapist. I know this show has a huge cult following, and I know that people really like her, but it helped to go in blind and not really know much about the show or not be biased by the show. And I'm really surprised, but I am putting her at 10 out of 10 would bare my soul to her. She is a good therapist in the sense that the main character, Rebecca, is kind of sporadic and emotional and often hard to get through to, and she is very patient and compassionate with her and has an ability to just sit with her well, which she really needs because she has borderline personality disorder. And kudos to this show, because I think a lot of TV shows obviously have touched on topics in mental health of grief or anxiety and depression, but there have been few and far between that have talked about borderline personality disorder in a way that's constructive and also true, which is really hard to do. I think it really puts it on the map in a really healthy way, which is very cool. So I appreciate that the show does that. I digress. I'm putting her in 10 out of 10 in part because of her way of attending to Rebecca and her needs, and in part because of her ability to be honest with Rebecca, which she also really needs.
You need and deserve love. It's okay for you to have it.
Because it's hard for her to take an accurate look at her own life. Disclaimer. I almost put her in helpful but flawed, but I didn't want to be too harsh because there is no such thing as a perfect therapist. Even I, a human being, have messed up in my therapy sessions with my clients, believe it or not. Oh, come on. You knew I was going to do The Sopranos. Let's do Dr. Melfi. She's the most famous therapist, I think, from any TV show. Sopranos had a huge impact on therapy, mental health, bringing awareness to those things. I mean, it really put therapy on the map, for better or for worse, however you want to argue that. That's a question for another day. But its impact on psychology in our mental health field cannot be understated. Dr. Melfi, though, a lot of people like her. And I think Dr. Melfi is a good portrayal of what therapy can look like, but I don't think she's a good therapist. For that reason,
for all of those reasons, I'm out.
I have ranked her in questionable ethics ahead. Hello again. She's back. Where are you going? That is a question I would have loved Dr. Melfi's therapist or supervisor to ask her about her work with Tony Soprano. Dr. Melfi, again, is a psychiatrist. I don't know why these TV shows don't just write them as psychologists, because everything she does in the show is psychology oriented and talk therapy oriented, not psychiatry. I digress. Dr. Melfi in the beginning does a really great job of staying boundaried with Tony. She pushes back against his sexual advances and tries to remain non-judgmental despite his immoral choices. But things really go off the rails when she starts drinking before sessions because she's so nervous about what Tony might tell her. And then multiple times he tries to quit therapy, and instead she beckons him back slowly, like calls him, is like, I have a session for you. I have a slot open. So it's this weird recognition that she actually ends up needing him and actually ends up being therapized by him, which as soon as that starts happening, so many ethical boundaries have been crossed. As soon as Toni was fulfilling something for her and her emotional needs, that's when she should have referred him out. There's too much transference there. There's now these weird dynamics, or maybe I think she did end up having an attraction to Toni, which that's not uncommon. Therapists can be attracted to their clients, but that's why we have these strict, harsh boundaries. That's why we refer out to other therapists. And at any point in time, she could have done that. She did not. So I initially said that question that I wish someone would have asked her of where are you going, because her intent in treating Toni becomes more and more blurred as the show goes on. She doesn't have a clear treatment plan. She doesn't have a clear goal. And it becomes more obvious as the show moves forward that instead of his goals that he's bringing to therapy and he wants to get out of therapy, she starts to therapize him through her own goal, which was to make Toni a more moral, better person. Part of ethical therapy is getting your clients where they want to go, not inserting your own goals or views or opinions about things. It's helping your clients reach betterment through their own desire. And initially, Toni is assigned to see her because he's having panic attacks, and she successfully helps him reduce his panic attacks. So as soon as that happened, then they should have therapeutically separated in a healthy way because the treatment plan had been successful. And this is a huge contention in the show, in the way that Dr. Melfi and Toni's relationship ends. It ends very abruptly. She basically drops him like it's hot. And they had been together 7 years. And as a therapist, if you've been seeing a client 7 years and then you just drop them, that's incredibly damaging and will instill a fear of abandonment and trauma in them if you do not end well with that client. It's a significant and very unique relationship that has to end well and should end well. And her just dropping him was therapeutically inappropriate and unethical. I will say one area in this relationship where I have complete respect for her, and another reason that I didn't put her in this therapist will ruin your life, is there's a scene where she gets assaulted in a garage. They find the guy and he gets released on a technicality, which really sucks. And Toni can tell that she's been assaulted. And he's asking her what happened. And she's super close to telling him who it was, because she fully knows that if she tells Toni, he will go and kill that man. She stops herself from telling him, despite what peace it would bring to her life, which I really respect, because that would have been unethical for her to reveal that. It would have put her in debt to Toni, and it would have completely shifted the power dynamics between them in therapy. So in that sense, she did protect the therapeutic relationship, and I think it was an incredibly hard choice to do so. So I respect her for that, but ultimately, I don't think she'd ruin your life, because I don't think she ruined Toni's life. I do think she helped him on some level, but she, towards the end, was making some really questionable ethical decisions and continuing to treat him when she shouldn't. So I do not think she is the most unethical therapist, but it's clear that her own boundaries and morality became more blurred towards the end of her relationship with Toni, landing her towards the bottom in our tier ranking, but not the complete bottom. Let's do another therapist that I think would ruin your life. Let's do the therapist from Gypsy, Jane Holloway. She would absolutely 100% ruin your life. Not a doubt about it. This show was canceled, so that should tell you everything you need to know about it. The basic premise of the show is that you follow this rich therapist, Jane, in New York, and she slowly infiltrates the lives of her clients through people that her client is connected to. She finds these individuals who are connected to her clients and secretly manipulates them for her own motives. Some of it is to help better her clients' lives because she feels like she's not doing an effective job in therapy, but some of it is because she's bored, which is psychopathic, and some of it is because she's not comfortable with her identity and she likes playing all these different roles and shape-shifting. It's very odd. If your therapist is the catch me if you can guy incarnate, just run so far away. Okay, where to next? She's been at the front for a while. So let's do Dr. Fieldstone from Ted Lasso. I like her a lot, and I think it's an accurate portrayal of therapy in a lot of ways. There are some flaws, so if you can guess where I'm going with this, I'm going to put her in helpful but flawed. This is one of the really, really good portrayals, I think, of therapy. But again, the ethical boundaries is where she falls short. She is fully and thoroughly credentialed, so she has her doctorate in psychology, specializing in sports psychology, which is great for exactly the work that she's doing. She's hired by the team at Richmond to come and help provide therapy to the team and to the team members. She's fantastic at connecting with Ted and conveying the importance of therapy in the midst of him being extremely skeptical about it. She is great at holding silence and not just trying to fix Ted or push him out of his negative feelings. That's all great, and I love those scenes, and I think they're very powerful. But Dr. Fieldstone also falls short in boundaries in a few different ways. For one, she gets into a biking accident, and yes, she is on drugs when she calls Ted, so it wasn't like a formally conscious thing that she was doing. But Ted shows up to the hospital. If I accidentally called a client to come get me at the hospital, one, I'm wondering, why is my subconscious thinking about my client in that way? Probably because consciously there's something else going on. And two, I would send my client away and call somebody else, like literally anybody else. So Ted shows up to the hospital, he gets her, he walks her home, and then Ted comes into her house, which I also am like, I literally never in my life would let a client into my house, literally ever. This sounds really harsh, but that's just like so intrusive and invasive into your life that's supposed to be very boundaried. Then Ted buys her a new bike because he feels bad about her biking accident, and she graciously and gratefully accepts it. The problem with this is that there's a huge code of ethics that comes along with accepting gifts when you're a therapist, because again, you're always thinking about power dynamics when you're in the room of therapy, because somebody's bearing their very vulnerable soul to you. So all of a sudden they give you a gift card for $150 to a restaurant. Well, guess what? You're not allowed to accept it. You're not supposed to, at least. I mean, I guess you could. A lot of states, my state particularly, the frame of reference for accepting gifts is anything under $25 is typically acceptable, which again, per my last speech about gifts, I'm guessing the bike was more than $25, but also they're in the UK, so I don't know what the rules are over there regarding therapy and accepting gifts. Maybe it's widely accepted. I don't know. I think one important thing to point out in all of the midst of this is that Dr. Fieldstone has a really unique dual relationship because she's hired by the team. So there's going to be this weird boundary crossing, boundary pushing aspect of things because she's present at the games, she watches practices, she talks to people in the hallway, in the commons. It's similar to being like a school counselor where you see your students that you're counseling maybe in the hallway or maybe in the lunchroom, and some of them are totally okay with you acknowledging them, and other ones are like, I do not want my friends to know I'm talking to the school counselor. So it does put on dual relationships, which are sometimes really hard to navigate and are typically avoided or tried to be avoided by therapists just because it blurs the lines so much. So as harsh as I'm being on her, I also can recognize that there's a unique position that she finds herself in on this team counseling all the team members. She's still trying to act boundaried and ethical in the midst of all of this, but she's definitely still pushing boundaries, which is why I haven't ranked her as 10 out of 10 would bear my soul, but helpful but flawed. I would still consider seeing her because I can tell that she is a powerful therapist that does good work. Well, while we're on the topic of Ted Lasso, we might as well talk about another therapist that will completely ruin your life, and that is Ted's couples therapy counselor. Woo! He will completely ruin your life. After he sees Ted and his wife for couples counseling, ends up dating his ex-wife. There's a rule in therapy that even if you stop therapeutic services with an individual client, you usually have to wait 5 years before you can hang out with them, become friends with them, whatever you want to call that interromantic relationship with them. 5 years is the standard. This was not 5 years later, in my understanding. That guy is therapist Thanos, just ruining everybody's lives in the snap of a finger. So, man, that really annoys me. Who does that? Who uses their therapeutic relationship in that way? Ugh. Let's do a good therapist. Okay, let's do Dr. Ryan. 10 out of 10 would bear my soul. 100%. She is my favorite therapist and my favorite portrayal of a therapist. Granted, I love the show and I'm biased because I love Never Have I Ever. It's such a great coming of age show, such an accurate portrayal of adolescent brains and processing through identity formation. I really love it for those reasons. But Dr. Ryan, I really don't see her cross ethical boundaries at all in the entire show. She is an amazing adolescent therapist, and she consistently displays the 3 core values that many therapists learn in schooling, which are empathy, congruency, and unconditional positive regard. Many might not know what unconditional positive regard is, but it's basically the idea of non-judgmentalness. No matter what your client tells you they've done or believes about themselves or believes about others, you still treat them with dignity, kindness, and respect. It's your ability as a therapist to value somebody completely and wholly, regardless of their value sets, their background, things they've done, etc. So she displays that in spades with Davy, as Davy makes so many questionable adolescent decisions throughout the show. She's empathic and compassionate. She's so encouraging to Davy in a boundaried way where Davy isn't relying on her for her self-worth or to feel better about herself. So it's delivered in a way that's still boundaried but powerful. And at the end of the day, she's not afraid to hold Davy accountable for her actions and be honest with Davy, because Davy makes really poor decisions that are hilarious throughout the show. And no matter what, Dr. Ryan is there on her side to back her up while still calling her out for what she needs to hear. So Dr. Ryan, 10 out of 10. I would bare my soul to her any day. I wept watching multiple of the sessions because they were just so powerful. Okay, the Gilmore Girls therapist, she literally just lets them yap for an hour and then doesn't intervene in any way, shape, or form. She doesn't stop them. She doesn't ask questions. She has no direction or guidance for them in the slightest. She also says there's no rules here. Everything's welcome here. Everything's allowed.
There are no rules.
That is so dumb. If you're working with couples in any way, shape, or form, whether it's an actual couple, romantic, or a pair, a mother-daughter pair, you establish rules. It just makes sessions healthier and go better, such as we don't talk over one another. We wait and actively listen and practice those skills so you can practice those outside of therapy. She doesn't do any of that. She just lets them yell at each other and sits there. I'm like, what are they paying her for? Honestly, maybe it would be better for them to just talk to a wall than talk to this therapist. I'm putting her in the middle at meh, it's better than nothing, because she doesn't do anything wrong, but she also doesn't do anything at all. Oh my gosh. Paul Weston. Ugh. This guy, he might be the worst, would ruin your life therapist. I feel like a lot of people are not familiar with the show In Treatment, and it's an HBO show that follows a therapist, Paul, who each episode is him doing sessions with different people who you follow throughout the show. Okay, he will ruin your life for multiple reasons. A, he practices out of his house. Don't ever do that as a therapist. Don't see people who practice out of their house, in my opinion. I just don't, no. I think maybe you could, maybe, but you just shouldn't probably. A, practices out of his house. B, his client professes feelings for him, which then he returns and says he's in love with her.
What are you thinking about now?
It's you.
To make matters worse, this guy is married with 3 kids and his wife's literally upstairs. Like, what is wrong with you? Something has gone so awry if your client says they're in love with you and you have feelings back for them. It's not uncommon for a client to have feelings for their therapist, but that's called transference. You're putting feelings for another on somebody else. See, he misses a mandatory report. This can give you jail time. You can get fined. You can lose your job. You can lose your license. He had a 16-year-old tell him that she was abused by somebody who was over 18, and he did not do anything about it. He did not contact the authorities. He did not tell her parents, which is also what you should be doing if your client is under 16 years old. And that to me is super egregious. Let's forget that he's in love with his other client. He's not reporting a significant safety concern and a significant trauma. And this guy who did the trauma is just running around free in the world. Like, can you be a worse therapist? I don't know. He is like bottom of the barrel. I literally, this guy needs to be in jail.
You're stealing, right to jail. You're playing music too loud, right to jail, right away. You're driving too fast, jail.
Straight up, not okay. Paul should be studied in therapy classrooms across the world of what not to do in therapy sessions 101. All right, last two. Oh yeah, the Dexter therapist. Straight up, she's going to ruin your life. She encouraged Deb to think that she was in love with Dexter, her brother. So I don't really need to go into it other than that. Straight to the point. If your therapist ever tries to tell you that you're in love with your sibling, run so far away. Last but not least, we got Lucy, 10 out of 10 from the Peanuts. I would bare my soul to her. For 5 cents a session, 100%. What could go wrong? Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my ranking session because there's a lot of portrayal of therapists out there, and some are good, some are bad, some are right in between. Maybe I'll do one on ranking movie therapists because that might be interesting. If there's anything else I should tier rank, let me know. I really appreciate your guys' support. Thank you so much for following me, and if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings, let me know in the comments kindly, please. And thank you for following along with me. I'll see you guys next week with my next video. Sorrel's kindly asleep here. Sage is asleep here. Maybe I'll tilt the camera so you can see. Okay, I will see you all soon. Bye.